this one up because I really didn't want to forget anything that I wanted to share tonight. January 1st, 2017, I got up early at the beach apartment where my parents have a little place in Ubatuba, Brazil. I took a deep breath with the promise of a fresh new year, and I looked at my daughters who were still asleep, and I thought to myself, good, 2016 is finally behind us. Oh, little did I know. As soon as I opened the news, this was the headline that popped on my Facebook account. 8 women, all from the same family, were murdered in Campinas, which was 45 minutes away from my parents' home in Jundiaí. We were heading back there in 2 days. I continued to read further. It was a dispute over custody, domestic violence allegations. The man, enraged with his ex-wife, decided to kill the whore and all of the other women related to her so he could truly end the bloodline. In the aftermath, he also killed his son, who was only about 5 years old, and the 2 men who tried to step in and stop him. 12 people in total in the bloodshed. That was on New Year's Eve. Reading the comments, however, was even more degrading to my soul. She must have done something. He must have had a reason. My daughters woke up, and I closed my computer quickly. My eyes were heavy, and I remember that in this world, choosing to be a mother means to never again sleep as soundly as they did now at the tender age of 4 and 6. A march was quickly organized for January 5th. Well, I politely canceled my plans of watching Moana with my mom, and I gently excused myself from visiting with my grandmother, and I most definitely found myself a ride to take me to Campinas. My father seemed visibly concerned that I would jump in a car with 3 complete strangers. You just don't do that in Brazil. You don't. But then I reminded him that these strangers were heading to a march that was protesting the murder of 8 women. It was highly unlikely that they would pose any threat to each other's lives. During the march, there was one moment, though, that really threw me off. And it wasn't the 8 dresses that were laid in the center of the square, or the more than 25 names that were actually read at the end of the evening of the other women who had been killed, all in 5 days of the new year. No. And those were the murders that were reported within those 5 days, all due to domestic violence. So one thing that really unsettled me, and I held on until quite recently, was a comment of a young woman who was there marching as well. This really lovely-looking, university-age woman looked at me and said, "Oh, look how cute," pointing to some women ahead of us. She said, "Even the grandmas showed up. Look." And I kind of took a step back, and I took a deep breath and looked at her carefully. She obviously had no idea she was talking to someone who actually worked with cross-generational ideas and conversations between women, but the universe is always so wise. She said that to me. So I decided to take a new approach that I've been trying to test out recently due to one of my newest mentors, and I take a deep breath and I stay calm with an exclamation mark, and the exclamation mark is key, but I stay calm. And I very politely looked at her and I said, "Well, if my math is at all accurate, I think they've actually been around much longer than you've been alive, but that's just me." And I walked away because I figured I'd be more productive than being angry and leaving the scene. So when I got home, the first person that I saw was my sweet grandmother, Rosa. She was there sitting in the living room, watching my daughters and giving me a chance to go march so that I could be free that evening to protest my anger. I sat by her feet, hugging her legs, and I just said, "Grandma, can you please tell me a story?" Because my heart was wrenched, my fists were clenched, my soul was enraged, and I felt heavy, and I just needed to hear a story. She proceeded to tell me about how she came all the way from Portugal to Brazil without knowing even how to read, and how it was the kindness of complete strangers, women specifically, mothers, that got her through. But then she also proceeded to tell me a story that I had never heard before, and I certainly didn't remember hearing it growing up. She told me about how no one showed up for her wedding with my grandpa. And I was shocked. My first thought was, my goodness, I really don't know this woman and how strong she was. But then I decided to be brave and ask her, why? She looked at me, trying to be as graceful about it as she could. After all, this was going to be more revealing about her family than she probably anticipated. And she said, well, your grandpa was brown, honey. He was brown. And I said, native. She didn't respond. She lowered her eyes. And I realized that consciousness, truth, reconciliation are so much deeper and require so much more effort than what my grandmother had been able and allowed to be a part of in the context of her time and space. So respecting my grandmother's 80 years on this planet, I tried to lighten up and I said, Grandma, you were on the side of resistance back then. To which she gently, candidly responded, no, it was never that. I just honestly loved him. And that's where the conversation ended. She couldn't go on, but in a flash, I remembered all the stories I had heard of my grandma having to explain to her that her daughters were in fact hers and not adopted. I imagined her getting through life baking and kneading and cooking. My grandma's oven, the one that brought not only her family together, but also an entire parish. Yes, sure, the priest handed out the Holy Host on Sundays, but make no mistake, because it was my grandmother's oven and her effort that baked the actual bread and cut them into little circles with a little cup that she still has in her cupboard to this day, proudly. I imagined her putting her body in the line of fire between her father and my grandfather, and I thought to myself, the grandmas? The grandmas have been there all along, honey, loving, nurturing, caring. A few days later, on January 20th, I was on my way to Washington, D.C. for the historical Women's March. And so on January 21st, I was marching again, this time in a much bigger crowd, in a much more organized event, but to be truthful, not in the slightest more important. I won't lie, I wasn't nearly as enthusiastic as the other women on my bus. I've been on this journey for quite some time now. To be quite honest, I was already quite drained, and I felt that another march was not going to lead me to the solutions that I was looking for. However, I knew this was an important historical event that I needed to be a part of, and so I went. As I sat by Marjorie, we began to chat, and right there, as I looked at her, I was involved in her stories, much like I was with my grandmother's. My ride to D.C. was filled with her explanation about her black pussy hat, to stories of strong women from Jamaica, as well as mango trees. We were bus buddies, and I won't lie, I was concerned about her. I was concerned that we wouldn't manage to get across the march, that we would lose sight of each other. I was concerned whether Marjorie was going to be able to keep up or not. Having Marjorie Knight as a partner, a black woman with a disability, added a layer to my experience which I had not anticipated or expected. So here's what actually happened in our shared time. People, women, gave her rides in DC, so she could get to the meeting spots and meeting places on time, offering to care for her. Strangers, much like my grandmother reminded me, trust the mothers. They also opened their homes so that so she could use the washroom, and I just happened to be there in the vacuum, and I used the washroom as well. And consequently, anyone around her, really. Marjorie also outlasted me greatly. By the time we realized that the DC March was clogged due to the much larger number of people that showed up, it was Marjorie, not me, who stood there stoically to listen to Angela Davis while I felt overwhelmed with the crowd, and I took off, leaving her with Sarah Bingman, and I just needed a breath and something to eat because I'm one of those hangry people. So I said, Marjorie, are you going to be okay? She's like, go. On our ride back, Marjorie told me more about her mother and how she had been one of the founding members of the UN Habitat. And when she told me that, I remember thinking, why don't I know about your mother? Why don't we learn more about women like her at school? The mothers. The mothers? The mothers have been there all along, fighting, resisting, crying, trying to survive, building as much as they were capable. On February the 18th, we held the workshop for this session of the Light Stories at my home. And in that workshop, I had a rather unexpected gut reaction. I said something out loud that thus far my heart knew to be true, and which I had been avoiding, blocking, and hiding. In listening to Mary and Laurie, who you will have the pleasure to listen in a few minutes, I realized that in erasing women's stories, the women like my grandmothers, the women like Marjorie's mother, in erasing any woman's voices, we've been erasing our understanding of care, intimacy, despair, loss, and love. At the very least, we've deemed all of that as unimportant in a society that ironically is desperately looking for love. We seem to consistently ignore that the answers we are seeking are right there within our reach. I realize that although I know how to be strong, blunt, fierce, courageous, I truly know close to nothing about how to truly be intimate, gentle, caring, soft, vulnerable, trusting, careful, especially when I am trying to love. Yes, women deserve respect as individuals. That's a granted, people. Our intellectual achievements deserve to be recognized, and our safety should be understood as each individual woman's human right. But love only happens in relationships, and relationships are about memory, familiarity, empathy, and trust. So then you must be wondering, what's next, in my opinion, after having been a part of both marches? The most glaring answer for me, the most important one of all, was that even though I like to think that I'm better than the woman who made that comment about the grandmothers in Brazil, I realized that really I am not. That both of us have been educated to think less of women during our entire lives, and that we know close to nothing about women who are different than us. I realized that I had made assumptions about Marjorie during the march, and it was a conscious effort of staying open that allowed me to challenge my thinking at every opportunity that I had. That awareness is a constant, brave act of living reflection. I also came back convinced that if we continue to erase women's stories, we will continue to erase our humanity. I came back decided to leave a professional legacy as an educator where the importance of women as active contributors of this world needs to be recognized at every system and at every level in an equitable manner. This means in schools, universities, and everywhere where collective memory and understanding is shared and created. I came back convinced that in not paying tribute to women like Gloria Dolores Knight, Marjorie's mother, we've erased women's brilliance. And it's no surprise then that girls as young as 6 believe that brilliance is strictly a male trait. I came back certain that as an artist, I will continue to create safe spaces where women's stories are valued, celebrated, and elevated through the arts on a regular basis with consistency so that we can remember who we are and where we've come from in order to know where we're headed. I know in my heart that as next steps, we need to build sustainable systems, engaging different generations of women and women of completely different industries and backgrounds. We also need to learn to love our diversity, our sexuality, as well as our mental health in a tender, honest way. If the Movember gentlemen can do it so openly, why can't we? You see, I want women to see themselves as brilliant. And in my mind, our brilliance goes far beyond professional accomplishments. It's about our resiliency. It's about our ability to raise communities. It's about empathy and intentions. And I want women to shine their light unapologetically on their own terms, telling their own stories, not to intimidate, but to inspire. My grandmothers, Rosa, and Aurora are with me everywhere I go. The flower and the light. It's impossible to know exactly what the future holds. But in learning to honestly trust myself while I stay open, putting my best effort forth, something else has started to shift. I'm beginning to learn that I can trust and respect time. And time so far has actually been the most revealing agent and active character and the live thread on which my entire life story is knitted. In these threads, these stories that allow me to hold on, these are the stories, these are the threads that allow me to hold on when things get tough. Remembering who I was, who I am, knowing where I've come from. I know that these threads of time will allow all of us to move on and to take on the journey of moving forwards without fear of each other, and in fact, moving each other forward. And during the journey, we no longer need to be afraid because after all, we've got a harbor now. Thank you.